This is Set Him Free, Chapter 13. Before we get started, I advise you to check the content warnings as this chapter can get a tad intense. But now we will move on with our story. A flash, red, hot, and burning. Flaming metal, searing, shining, closing in faster. Ragged breaths and blasts of pain. So much pain. Janus woke up screaming. He thought he'd moved past nights like this, ones where the past flew at him full force, but nothing could separate him from what had happened years ago. The memories wrapped around his mind with searing tendrils, lashing tighter just when he thought he had forgotten it all. Each time it happened, he remained awake for the rest of the night. Staring into the darkness of his bedroom seemed much better than witnessing nightmares again. Sometimes, he didn't even gain a full picture. He just felt the burning against his skin. Janus tried to dispose of the recollections. He tried to erase the feelings that tugged at the back of his subconscious, but only one thing seemed to quench his discomfort. He silently entered his study the next morning, his mind sluggish from another sleepless night. Rain pattered against the windowsills, and Janus groaned. Just another event adding to the intolerable fog of his mind. The shining of candlelight glistened off his current projects, enhancing the brass surfaces. Brass, safe, polished, manageable. There was a comfort to his inventions. Hours of hard work all combined to create a beauty never before seen. Individuality emanated from each piece, reminding Janus that he was still here, that he still had control. Mindlessly, his hand drifted to the scar on his face, a habit he found himself doing all too often. His skin remained coarse under his fingertips, and it didn't take a mirror for him to picture the reddened mark that occupied its surface. He needed a distraction, he decided. The wooden legs of the stool creaked as he sat before his workbench. Everything was placed just as it should have been, inventing seeming to be his only constant, especially with the recent coming of the prince. Janus had pushed away any events surrounding Roman, realizing too quickly that facing his history was a difficult matter. He would reach it eventually, Janus liked to assure himself, but for now, he was completely content to tinker. Virgil would surely inform him if anything were to occur, and until then, he could remain just as he had been. Still, the kingdom's efforts were nearing closer to Janus each day. Remus had told him countless times of the increasing guards, another thing he was seemingly unbothered by. It had taken every ounce of his strength not to wince at the statement. Nonchalance was only so easy to portray. Then, Virgil had come to him the day before. If Janus's answer to the thieves' question had bothered him, he sure hadn't shown it, but Janus thought he had caught something else within Virgil. Maybe it was the slight tensing of his shoulders, or his downcast eyes, but something seemed wrong. Janus would need to confirm that Virgil could still be trusted. Still, time was running thinner with each day, and Roman seemed extremely unwilling to provide Janus with the answers he so desperately needed. Did no one understand the dangers Eldon faced? It was absurd how society was so reluctant to open their eyes and realize the real faults of this world. They would see soon enough, Janus vowed. He would show them all. His eyes drifted to the oak bookshelf in the corner. He had been frantic the last time he touched the leather-bound journals inside. Could something of use be found with a clear head? Janus wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer to that. He forced his feet to shuffle forward, plucking the smallest journal from the collection. It was a pitiful thing, the corners ripped from countless uses, and tea stains occupying almost every page. The binding was slowly disintegrating, cracking in protest when Janus lifted the cover. At the time, it had been his everything, a place to put all the words he couldn't say, the one place Janus never had to lie. There, at the very top of the page, sat his first entry. Day 1. My life has been flipped on its side. This morning, King Alistair himself entered the forge and asked to see me of all people. For a moment, I was convinced this was to be some kind of trick from the other blacksmiths. But soon after, he called for me again. It's unbelievable that he'd even heard of a commoner such as myself, though that's not even the best part. King Alistair told me that he had taken interest in my blacksmithing skills and wanted to hire me for a project of the kingdom's. I obviously accepted, and now I get to stay in the castle. My first day starts tomorrow. Wish me luck. Janus sighed, running his fingers over the rough cursive. He had written this at age 12, when he had possessed the privilege of ignorance. Nothing worthwhile would come from these earlier writings. He had been too filled with childlike wonder at the time to be perceptive. Janus closed the notebook, gently inserting it back into the sea of leather and twine upon the shelf. He should have stopped at that. Diving deeper could only bring forth more trouble, but he found himself yearning for answers. Reaching out, he gazed further down and removed a dark brown volume from the shelf. The pages of this installment held small sketches and diagrams, and the writing inside was much more condensed, as if trying to document as many findings as possible. Day 243. King Alistair and I are still searching for the perfect concoction for our project. He keeps looking within flowers and grains, though I believe we may find our solution within metal. I feel as if we are becoming closer to our goal every day, though I'm still not exactly sure what our goal is. Whenever I ask King Alistair, he just tells me it will make Eldon better. That could mean a lot of things, but I trust the king, so I'll keep working. What a fool he had been then. Janus turned to the last pages, seeking anything of use. Something in the back of his mind urged him to cease his search, but he pushed it far away. Day 547. King Alistair has finally explained our purpose. We are working to create a cure for a number of diseases that could plague the town. Still, our experimentation with toxic items seems to suggest we are creating the disease itself. I asked the king about this, but he just told me that we have to create the disease first if we are to find a cure. His logic is questionable to me. I shall investigate further. Janus knew what came next, but he couldn't stop himself from venturing further. At the very edge of the shelf sat the last installment of his writings, the remaining pieces kept in a cream envelope. Hesitantly, Janus pulled it from the shelf and pulled the paper scraps from inside. It was all that had survived from that night. In the very bottom of the envelope was a crumpled scrap of paper, and it didn't even take a glance for Janus to know it was what he had been searching for. Day 639. He lied. We are all in danger, and I was a fool to play his game. He has created something toxic, something that could destroy entire kingdoms and hundreds of people. I tried to hide my discoveries for him, but I was too slow. He has taken away all of my work and the compound I have ignorantly created. Please, whoever may be reading this, you must find where he has hidden it. Don't fall prey to the kingdom's glamour like I did. Trust no one. The parchment sat rigid in Janus's hands, and he gripped it until his knuckles turned white. He felt the heat that followed those letters, all of the yelling that had surrounded him. Towering figures, closing around him, all filled with unbearable rage. He couldn't breathe. Flames, circling higher and bathing everything in a blistering red, all while the room boomed with shouting. Janus doubled over, grasping at the edge of his desk. He needed to breathe. He needed to remember where he was, but the flames licked higher. Janus swore he could feel the heat on his face, scorching his skin with a terrifying intensity. Not real, he choked, gripping the desk tighter. Not real, not real. Everything was too close, too hot, too sharp. He was trembling. Janus could feel it, yet no matter what he did, he couldn't stop. Not when the image of King Alistair's face had shone so clearly within his mind. Those eyes, they had pierced his soul until they closed for the final time. He had felt Alistair's stare, even as he had cried out in agony, even as the liquid metal had splashed onto his skin. There was no escape. There was nowhere to go when everything was bathed in orange. Janus clenched his jaw. With each blink, he saw more flames growing, surrounding him with a withering power. His fingers wrapped around the cool leather covers of the journals. All the memories, all the anguish was stored inside those journals, captured in a sea of black ink. Janus felt their pull at the back of his mind, yet he couldn't erase it. He couldn't yank free from the past. It kept slamming into him with a flaring severity and leaving him weak in the knees. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted the study's fireplace. Sweat covered his brow as he fished a match from his drawer. He struck the match, flinching as the small flame surfaced. Quickly, he tossed the match into the fireplace, the crackling of the fire sending a shiver down his spine. He didn't run from the heat, not as he threw the journals into the fire, not as he burned every last memory. Soon, each record became ash, until all that remained was the lonely scrap of paper. Janus picked it up, crushing it between his fingers with a satisfying crunch. He needed answers, and he was going to get them. The iron key sat cold in his hands as he tore open the lock, striding inside to both Roman and Virgil's surprise. "Out," he said coldly, glaring at Virgil. The thief complied, quickly exiting the room and closing the door with a jarring click. Roman looked to him with those pitiful green eyes, one so close to Alistair's he couldn't take it. He crushed the paper harder in his fist, his hands quivering under the pressure. Janus spoke so softly it barely registered as a whisper. "Tell me everything. Where are you hiding it?" "What?" Hot, scorching. "Don't lie to me. Where did you hide it?" Roman met his eyes with pure bewilderment. "Hiding what? I don't understand." "Stop it!" Janus barked, running a frantic hand through his hair. "Tell me the truth. I demand it." Searing, blistering, burning. "I don't know what you're talking about, I swear," Roman cried, drawing back. "Liar!" Glowing, flaring, pain. "I promise I'm not lying. Please, calm down." Flickering, roaring. "You won't tell me the truth? Fine." Janus's breath emerged shallow, sweat dousing his face as the world seemed to boil. "Mark my words, Prince. You will not eat, you will not drink, you will not see so much as another human face until I hear the truth." He marched toward the door, and Roman blanched. "Wait! Please, wait!" He thrust forward, reaching towards Janus. "I don't know anything, I swear! Janus, please!" The inventor ignored him, gritting his teeth and wrapping his fingers firmly around the door handle. Janus slammed the door, hard, shoving the lock into place. He sank to the ground, pressing his back up against the door where he could still hear the prince's muffled calls. Hot tears spilled freely down his cheeks, but he barely noticed them. Everything felt drained, as if he had just been tossed on shore by whatever waves plagued his mind. Stop. The word emerged from the chaos of his mind. Janus didn't know why it had taken so long to surface. Breathe. He pinched the edges of his sleeves, fiddling with the fabric just as Virgil had taught him. Keep busy, he remembered. Take deep breaths and keep your hands moving. Breathe. He mouthed the words. In and out, in and out. Slowly, the red-hot flames dampened from his vision, his head no longer filled with a suffocating smoke. Janus leaned his head back against the door, sighing at the heavy weight of his limbs. Roman still cried out from behind the door, and Janus tensed at the sound. Such desperate pleas. Part of him worried the prince truly was clueless. Janus pinched the bridge of his nose, groaning at the headache that had risen from his racing mind. What was he going to do? Jan, are you all right? Virgil's voice drifted from around the corner. I'm fine, he lied, quickly standing up and straightening his clothing. I just need to think. Virgil's brow furrowed. Are you sure? It's all right if you're not. He reached a hand out. Don't! Janus hissed, slapping Virgil's hand away. The thief shrunk back immediately, his eyes growing wide. I have some things to take care of. Stay out of my study. The words felt bitter on his tongue. Janus couldn't remember an instance in which he had ever spoken that way to Virgil. Still, he no longer had time for niceties. The paper within his hand reminded him with every second of how treacherous the world could be. Quickly, the inventor pushed past Virgil and didn't stop until he was within the walls of his study. The door shook on its hinges as he slammed it shut, the sound roaring like thunder in his mind. He closed his fist tight around the paper, and a sharp pain slashed through his finger. Janus yelped, dropping the scrap from his hand where a small cut was beginning to shine red. Tears stung the back of his eyes, and he pitched the parchment into the fireplace before sinking to the floor. Only as it burned to complete ash did Janus allow his tears to fall. This has been Chapter 13 of Set Him Free. Thank you so very much for listening, and I will see you next time for Chapter 14.